She had been 5 different women in 7 years, 5 names, 5 sets of papers, 5 rooms in 5 different towns, each one chosen for the same reason, far enough from the last place that no one would think to look, close enough to a road that she could leave within the hour if she had to. She had learned to travel light, one trunk, nothing that could not be left behind, nothing she could not replace. She had learned to make herself unremarkable, to speak just enough to satisfy courtesy and not enough to be remembered, to look at people the way you look at furniture, present but unnoticed, to become, in any room she entered, the woman no one could describe afterward. She had been very good at it. Until the morning she walked through the servants' gate of Wrenfield Hall, and the Duke of Wrenfield looked up from his correspondence and said, without hesitation, without question, without any uncertainty she had spent 7 years counting on, he said her real name. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Duke Obsession. Every week we bring you a story of hidden identities, impossible discoveries, and the moment running stops being an option. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Now back to her real name. The name she had given at the servants' gate that morning was Jane Marsh. The name before that had been Clara Webb in a house in Lincolnshire, where she had worked as a laundress for 8 months before a man in a dark coat had asked the innkeeper in the village whether anyone new had arrived recently, and she had left before morning. Before Clara Webb there had been Anne Somers, and before Anne Somers there had been Margaret Cole, and before Margaret Cole there had been the name she had been born with, the name she had not spoken aloud, had not written, had not allowed herself to think in anything more than the briefest unguarded moment before she pushed it back down below the surface where it could cost her nothing. She was 26 years old. She had spent 7 of those years being no one. She had arrived in the village of Wrenfield 3 weeks ago, having chosen it the way she chose everywhere, by the map rather than by preference, by the distance from the last place rather than by any pull toward this one. She had found lodgings above the bakery. She had presented herself at Wrenfield Hall, the great estate on the hill above the village, as a woman of modest experience looking for any position available. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dove, had looked at her references, carefully forged, a skill she had acquired out of necessity in the 2nd year of running, and had said she could start Monday in the laundry. She had started Monday. She had told herself she would stay 6 months. 6 months was her limit, long enough to save enough to move again, short enough that no one had time to look too closely. She had not planned for the Duke. She had seen him twice before the morning he said her name, once at a distance, crossing the stable-yard on a gray horse with the easy authority of a man who grew up certain that the ground beneath him was his and had long since thought about it. Once in the corridor outside the library, where she had been carrying linens and he had been walking with his steward, deep in conversation, and had passed her without a glance. This was what she needed from employers, to be invisible to them, to be furniture. It was safer that way. The Duke of Wrenfield was named Cass Vane. He was 34, dark-haired, with gray eyes that she had noticed, in the 2 glimpses she had allowed herself, were the kind of eyes that did not move through rooms the way most eyes did, cataloging and dismissing in the same motion. They rested. They observed. They appeared, even in the brief moments she had seen them, to be the eyes of a man who was paying a different quality of attention than the people around him. She had noted this and filed it under dangerous and had been careful to avoid him. She had not been careful enough. On the Tuesday of her 3rd week, she was sent to the East Library to dust and set the fire. It was early. 7:30, the house still finding its morning rhythm. She had assumed the library would be empty. The Duke was at the desk.
He looked up when she entered. She kept her eyes down and moved to the fireplace with the practiced invisibility of a woman who had spent 7 years perfecting it. She heard him set down his pen. She heard the particular silence of a person who has stopped what they were doing, not by accident, but by decision. She laid the fire with hands that she kept entirely steady through an act of will that cost her more than it should have. He said, "How long have you been in Wrenfield?" She said, 3 weeks, Your Grace. Her voice was Jane Marsh's voice, flat, colorless, the voice of a woman with no history worth asking about. He said, and before Wrenfield. She said, Lincolnshire, Your Grace. He said nothing for a moment. He heard him pick up his pen. She finished the fire. She picked up her basket. She kept her eyes down. She was almost at the door when he said, You are safe here. She stopped. She said, I beg your pardon, Your Grace? He said, I said you are safe here. He was writing again, his voice entirely even. Whatever you are running from, you are safe in this house. She did not turn around. She said, I am not running from anything, Your Grace. He said, All right. She left. She sat in the laundry for 20 minutes afterward with her hands flat on the table and her breathing controlled and deliberate, and told herself it meant nothing. Employers said strange things. It did not mean he knew. She did not believe herself. She waited for the knock on her door above the bakery that night. It did not come. She waited for the man in the dark coat to appear in the village square the next morning. He did not appear. She went back to Wrenfield Hall on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and the Duke did not seek her out and did not speak to her, and passed her twice in corridors without acknowledgement, exactly as powerful men passed servants, and she began, carefully, to breathe again. On Saturday morning she was sent to the study to replace the lamp oil. He was there again. She performed the task with the efficient invisibility she had spent 7 years building. She was almost finished when he said, without looking up from the document he was reading, How is your mother, Elara? The lamp oil bottle slipped in her fingers. She caught it. The room was completely silent. He had not said Jane. He had not said Clara or Anne or Margaret. He had said Elara. Her name, her real name, the one she had not heard spoken aloud in 7 years, the one she had buried so deep she sometimes went entire weeks without thinking it, and when she did think it, the sound of it in her own mind felt like touching a wound that had not healed. She set the bottle down very carefully on the table. She said, I do not know what you mean, Your Grace. He set down his document. He looked at her directly for the first time since the library. Those gray eyes, resting rather than cataloging, with the particular qualities she had identified as dangerous and had been correct about. He said, Your mother is Cecily Vane. She was my father's cousin. He said it quietly. She disappeared from this county 18 years ago, following a marriage the family did not approve of. She took her daughter with her. He paused. The daughter would be 26 now. She would have dark hair and amber eyes and a way of holding herself that is not a servant's way, whatever clothes she puts on top of it. He said, I have been looking for her for 3 years. Elara stood very still. She said, You could be wrong. He said, I am not wrong. He said it without arrogance, simply as a man stating something he had verified. I recognized you the morning you arrived. I have spent 3 weeks making certain before saying anything.
She said, Why did you wait 3 weeks? He said, Because you have been running for a long time, and I did not want to be one more thing you had to run from. She had not sat down in a great house as a guest in 7 years. The study felt different now, the same room, different gravity. She sat because he asked her to, and because her legs had made the decision before she had. She said, How much do you know? He said, Enough. Tell me the rest. She looked at the fire. She said, My father was a man named Edward Marsh. He married my mother when she was 19, against her family's wishes. He was not a cruel man at first. He became one. She paused. When I was 17, I saw him do something, not to my mother, to a man who worked for him. Something that meant he could not allow me to be a witness to it. He said, What did you do? She said, I ran. My mother helped me. She gave me money and a name and told me never to come back. She paused. The name was Jane Marsh, his name. She thought it was safer than her own. She paused. She was right.
He said, "And your mother?" She said, "I do not know. I have not been able to write. I have not been able to ask." She said it flatly, the way she said things that cost her, with the practiced composure of a woman who had learned that feeling things fully was a luxury she could not afford when she needed to keep moving. "I have not known for 7 years whether she is alive." He said, "She is alive." Elara looked at him. He said, "I told you I have been looking for 3 years. I found your mother before I found you. She is in Bath, living quietly under her own name. She has been looking for you for 4 years." The fire crackled. Outside the Wrenfield grounds, the 300 acres of land that she now understood was connected to her by blood she had spent 7 years trying to bury. She said, "She is alive." He said, "Yes." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "How do I know you were telling the truth?" He opened the desk drawer. He removed a letter and placed it on the desk between them. He said, "She wrote this 6 months ago when I told her I believed I had found you. She asked me to give it to you when I was certain." He paused. "I am certain." She looked at the letter, her mother's handwriting. She had not seen it in 7 years. She had not forgotten a single curve of it. She did not touch it yet. She said, "And my father?" He said, "Edward Marsh died 4 years ago." He said it directly, without softening. The man he harmed brought a case against him. He did not survive the winter after the verdict. She said, "I have been running for 3 years after he was already dead." He said, "Yes, I am sorry. If I had found you sooner." She said, "You found me." She picked up her mother's letter. He came to Wrenfield on a Wednesday. Not Edward Marsh, he was dead, but the men who had worked for Edward Marsh were not dead, and some of them had reasons of their own for wanting the only witness to what had happened 7 years ago to remain unfound. Mrs. Dove came to Elara in the laundry at 10:30 with the expression of a woman who had been told something she did not know how to deliver. She said, "There is a man at the gate. He says he is looking for a woman. He gave a description." Elara set down the linen. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. 7 years had made them that way. She said, "What did you tell him?" Mrs. Dove said, "I told him we had no one matching that description." She paused. "His Grace asked me to come to you directly." Elara said, "Where is His Grace?" Mrs. Dove said, "At the gate." She went to the window that looked over the front approach. The Duke was at the gate, not the estate manager, not a footman, the Duke himself, in his shirt sleeves, with the settled, immovable quality of a man who had decided something and was not going to be moved from it. The man in the dark coat was speaking. The Duke was listening with the polite, absolute attention of someone who had already made every decision relevant to the conversation and was simply waiting for it to finish. She could not hear what was said. She watched the man in the dark coat try 3 different approaches. She could read them in his posture, the shifting strategies of a man who was used to getting what he wanted by persistence and had encountered something that persistence could not move. The Duke said something. The man in the dark coat went very still. Then he left. He did not look back. The Duke watched him go. Then he turned and walked back toward the house with the unhurried stride of a man returning from something that had required less effort than expected. Elara was in the corridor when he came inside. She said, "What did you say to him?" He said, "I told him that no woman matching his description had ever worked at Wrenfield Hall." He said it simply. "And I told him that if he or anyone connected to him came to this estate again, I would ensure that the full record of Edward Marsh's trial, including the names of everyone associated with his operations, was delivered to the appropriate authorities in London." She said, "You had that information?" He said, "I told you I had been looking for 3 years. I was thorough." He looked at her. "He will not come back." She said, "You cannot know that." He said, I know the type of man who responds to that particular threat. He has more to lose than you do." He paused. "You do not have to run anymore, Elara." It was the second time he had said her name. It was easier to hear the second time. She wrote to her mother that afternoon, not a careful letter, not a letter composed with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had trained herself to need nothing, a real letter, written at the Duke's desk with his pen and his paper, that began with the only sentence that mattered. It said, "I am safe. I am in Wrenfield. I have been found by someone who was looking." She sent it with the Duke's fastest rider. Her mother arrived 11 days later. Elara was in the walled garden when the carriage came through the gates. She heard it and did not go immediately because she needed one more moment of being a woman who had survived 7 years alone before she became something else. Then she went. Cecily Vane was 51, smaller than Elara remembered, with gray at her temples and the particular quality of a woman who had spent years carrying something heavy and had not put it down because she did not yet know where to set it. She saw Elara at the garden gate. She stopped walking. Elara crossed the distance. They did not speak for a long time. There was nothing that needed to be said in that moment that words were adequate for. The Duke stood at the entrance of the hall and did not come forward. He understood, she realized, that this was not a moment that needed him in it. He had done what he could do and had stepped back, and she found in that stepping back the particular quality she had been trying to name since the morning in the library when the Duke had told her she was safe. He was the kind of man who knew the difference between helping and taking over. She had not known that kind of man existed. Later, much later, when her mother was settled in the rooms that had been prepared, when tea had been drunk and letters had been read, and 7 years of silence had begun carefully the slow work of being filled in, the Duke found her in the walled garden. He said, "How is she?" She said, "She is herself." She paused. I had forgotten what that looked like.
He said, "And you?" She considered the question. It was not a question she had been asked in 7 years, not genuinely, not by someone who intended to wait for a real answer. She said, "I do not entirely know yet who I am when I am not running." She said it honestly, without performance. I have been someone else for so long that being myself feels like wearing clothes that fit, but that I have not yet broken in. He said, "That seems like something that takes time." She said, "Yes." He said, "There is time." He said it the way he said things that were true, simply, without decoration. "This house is not going anywhere. Your mother is here." He paused. "I am here." She looked at him. She said, "You have been looking for me for 3 years." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because you were missing and you should not have been." He paused. "Because your mother asked for help and I had the means to provide it." He paused again, and she understood that the pause was a man deciding how honest to be. "Because your grandmother spoke of you before she died as the person in the family with the most sense and the straightest spine and the least patience for pretense. And I found, looking for you, that she was right. And I found that I wanted very much to meet the actual person rather than the ghost of her." She said, "And now that you have?" He said, "Now that I have, I find I am in no hurry for you to leave." The garden was quiet around them. The climbing rose on the south wall moved in the evening wind. Somewhere in the house, her mother was drinking tea in a warm room and reading a letter, and being, for the first time in years, exactly where she was supposed to be. Elara said, "I have not stayed anywhere longer than 6 months in 7 years." He said, "I know." She said, "I do not know how." He said, "I think you begin by not leaving."
She looked at the rose on the south wall, deep red, deliberate, growing exactly where it had always been. She said, "That seems manageable." He almost smiled. She stayed. She had been 5 different women in 7 years. She had been Jane and Clara and Anne and all the careful, invented lives she had built and abandoned in the name of survival. She had arrived at Wrenfield as nobody. She had been found by a man who had been looking for 3 years, who had known her name before she gave it, who had stood at his own gate and turned away the last thing chasing her without being asked and without making her feel the debt of it. She written to her mother. Her mother had come, and for the first time in 7 years, Elara Vane, her real name, her only name, the one she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten its shape, did not pack the trunk. She unpacked it instead, put things on shelves, hung something on a wall, made a place that was hers. Some women spend years running from who they are. The lucky ones find a place that makes the running stop. Elara had been running for 7 years. She was finished now. If this story reached you, subscribe to the Duke Obsession right now. Every week we bring you a new story. Women who have been running, men who have been looking, and the moment the door opens and everything that was lost finally comes home. Turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments, what was the moment you knew she was safe? Until next time, remember, some people spend years being nobody. The right person calls them by their real name, and the running stops.